Today's lesson is going to be a quick review of solving equations. We're only going to focus on one-step, two-step, and multi-step equations where the variables are on just one side of the equal sign. So the next lesson we'll do some tougher equations. All right, so the biggest rule with solving an equation is it's like untying a knot. So if you think about when you tie your shoes, when you want to untie them, you have to undo the last thing you did first. So basically, you're going to undo whatever you start with a variable and then you do stuff to it. And whatever the writer would have done last is the thing you undo first. So your biggest rule with equations is you got to treat the equal sign like it's a balance. So you always need to maintain the balance. And what I mean by that is if whatever you undo on one side of the equal sign, you have to do that exact same action on the other side. Otherwise, your balance is thrown off. So like think of an equation like the equal sign is the center of the balance beam. So if you want to add 4 to this side, great, but then you also have to do it over here or your balance isn't going to stay level. So I know a lot of you probably have learned to draw some bars around your equal symbols. It just helps you keep your sides separated. So this would be your left side of a scale and this is your right. So it looks like our variable's on the left side. So we are adding 3.5, so we're going to undo that by subtracting. So you're removing 3.5 from the left, then you also have to do it from the right side. So when we're solving equations, something should always cross out to either make 0 or 1. So 3.5 minus itself is 0. So we don't write 0, we just bring down x because that's what we have left over. And then negative 2.9 and negative 3.5 are going to make negative 6.4. So if we look at letter B, again, I like to draw my bars to separate the problem. And it looks like we subtracted 3.5, so we're going to undo that by adding 3.5. Double check my math here. So 3.5 minus 2.9 is going to be 0.6. And that's the value of x. In letter C, the problem reads 4 times y. So we are multiplying the variable by 4. So to undo that, we're going to divide by 4 on both sides of our equation. 4 divided by 4 is really just 1. So we're left with 1y, or just y. And instead of writing 14 over 4, I'm going to write 7 over 2, since you have to reduce all your fractions. In letter D, it looks like we divided by 2.1, so we're going to undo that by multiplying by 2.1 on both sides of our equation. So what happens is we have 2.1 times 1 over that, and that always becomes 1 when you multiply by the reciprocal. And 2.1 times 12 it's going to be 25.2. to get R. Alright, and then last but not least, again, we look at the side that has the variable on it. So I have 1/8 times y. So if I need to undo that, I need to divide by 1/8. And since it's a fraction, we're actually going to multiply by the reciprocal because that's how we learn to divide fractions. So what happens is these 8s become 1s, and obviously the 1s stay as 1s. So we're just left with 1y. And then I'm going to multiply this side by 8 over 1. And I'm going to get 16 over 3. So those are what we call one steps, because obviously one step and you're done. So 2 steps, kind of self-explanatory. 2 steps and we're done. So look at the side that has the variable. It looks like our variable was doubled and then subtracted by 4. So I'm going to undo the subtraction first. And these make 0. And I'm left with a 2x on this side and a 10 over here. So 2 times x, to undo that, has to be division. So my answer is going to be 5. Looking at letter B, we took x and multiplied by 2/3, and then we added 5. So we're going to undo that first. That makes 0, and this makes -8. So to divide by 2/3 means to multiply by its reciprocal. And the 3's become 1's, and the 2's become 1's. So we're left with x equals -8. Letter C is one we got to be careful of. So it says 12 minus y. So the first thing I like to do is put a 1 in front of the y, because we don't want to forget about that coefficient. So we really have 12 plus a -1y. That's really what this problem is saying. So our variable was multiplied by -1, and then we added a 12 to it. And the reason I know we added positive 12 is because there's no negative symbol here. So we're just going to subtract 12 on both sides. That makes 0. And I'm left with -1y equals -22. And if we divide by -1 on both sides, we're going to get positive 22. So when you're undoing and solving an equation, always look in front of whatever you're trying to undo to see if it's positive or negative. So since there was no minus in front of the 12, I have to subtract the 12. So just be careful. A lot of kids see the minus here and they think they need to add 12, and you're not looking at it correctly. It is a positive 12. You need to undo that. And then letter D. So before we go and solve our equations, we always want to address when we see a negative and a parenthesis and a negative, because we really want to change that to an addition problem. That's what that means. So this is a lot friendlier to look at. So it looks like we have a positive 9. So we're going to subtract it. And we get 0. And over here we get 3. So I actually want to do an extra problem, so this will be problem E. And I'm going to write -9 plus x equals 12. So it's almost the same problem. So if we want to solve for x, this is where kids get confused, because it looks like we're adding 9. But we don't read a problem like that. We don't read it from right to left. This really says x minus 9. So we actually don't want to subtract 9, we want to add it to both sides. So in that case, we're going to get 21. So we really want to be careful about that. Again, I don't really look at the sign behind something. I look at the sign in front of it, and I do opposite of what I see. We're going to finish up with some multi-step equations. And again, the variables are still on one side of the equal sign, so they shouldn't be too bad. And these will be a little bit more work, so I definitely will draw my bars. So go ahead and distribute that we've already learned. So we get a -3x, and -3 times a -5 is going to make positive 15. And that equals 12. So if I want to get x alone, it was multiplied and then added. So I'm going to subtract, and then divide. So my answer is 1. And make sure whenever you're dividing, you start with the side that has the letter on it. You're always looking to the side that has the letter, and that's what you focus on undoing. The rest of this is just going to play out to equal something, so you don't really have to worry about this. You'll know what to do. Alright, so in letter B, I'm just really quickly going to put a 1 right here so I don't forget. So that's really what the problem is saying, so we're going to have to distribute twice. So I have 2 minus 2y minus 3y minus 6. Okay, so we talked about combining like terms. So you have a negative 2y and a negative 3y. Now you're not doing opposite operations, you're just recounting what's over here. So just group these together to make negative 5y's. Similarly, we can group a positive 2 and a negative 6 together. So I'm not undoing either of these, I'm just simply combining them. So 2 and negative 6 will make negative 4. So it looks like we multiplied y by negative 5, and then from that we would be taking 4 away. So I'm going to start by adding 4. Or again, you can just look at whatever's in front of the number. If it's negative, then that means you have to add a positive. So you have negative 5y equals 16. And then you're going to divide by negative 5. And I apologize for running out of space with this problem. So your final answer is negative 16 over 5. Letter C, we have some fractions, but that's okay. So we're going to start by, I like to distribute the negative 2/6 into the problem. So y over 3 is the same thing as 1/3 y. Negative 2/6 times 9 is going to be negative 18/6. And negative 2/6 times negative 1 is positive 2/6. And I'm really quickly just going to reduce here. I don't like these fractions not reduced, so I'm going to change it to 18 over 6 is the same thing as 3. And 2 over 6 is obviously 1/3. So we have to combine like terms. We have a positive third and a negative 3. So that's going to give us negative 2 and 2/3 y plus 1/3 equals 20. So it looks like I multiplied y by negative 2 and 2/3, and then we added a third, so I'm going to undo the adding first. And before I bring this down, I'm going to go ahead and change this to an improper fraction and attempt to do this by hand. So 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8. So I have negative 8/3 y equals 20 minus a third is going to be 19 and 2/3. And again, I just like to change my fractions into impropers. So if we do 19 times 3, that's going to give us 57, 58, 59. So if we multiply here, we're going to multiply by negative 3/8. And these will make 1s, and these can make 1s as well. So your final answer, and I'll have to write it here for right now, is going to be negative 59 over 8. And that's it. So you just have to watch out for those fraction ones. I'm going to go ahead and erase this middle problem since we're done with it. That way I have some room to write my next couple problems. Okay, Okay, so if we look at letter D, again, going to separate the problem here. So it's a scale. So it looks like we took P, we tripled it, subtracted 15, and then divided by 9. So the first step we need to do in this case is to multiply by 9. And we'll undo that step. And what happens is, it's really like you're taking this whole thing times 9, and when that happens, you can just reduce the 9s to make 1s. So 9 times 6 is negative 54. And you're going to be left with 3p minus 15. So it looks like I took p, I tripled it, subtracted 15, so we're going to add 15 to start. And 54 minus 15 would be, I believe, negative 39. And then we'll finish by dividing. So we should get negative 13. I'm just going to erase this stuff here since we're done with it. That way the problem doesn't look so scary because there's all this writing in there. Okay. And then letter E. So again, we took P, multiplied it by 2/3, and then subtracted 25. So that's where I start solving the problem. And so 115 plus 25 is going to be 140. And just like the other fraction problems, we're going to multiply this by the reciprocal so that these become 1s and these become 1s. So 1 times p is just p. And I can't forget to multiply by 3 over 2 over here. And I'm going to do a little cheating, and I'm going to reduce 2 and 140 to make 1 and 70. And then 7 times 3 is 21, and tack on a 0. So that's your answer.